you very much for the introduction. And we are also very happy that you have invited us to present our work, because as we wrote to already to Valerie, we are working for people like you. And our task is to make your case more fundamental. So to give you additional arguments which you could use when you try to protect the forests. And we are very much fond of forests ourselves, and Victor, as a although he is a physicist theoretician, he spent a lot of time in Russian wilderness. So, and we spend about 2 months everywhere on the Russian north. So we have a first-hand experience with forests as well, not only like theoreticians. So today we are we'll be talking about the biotic pump, but it is only one part of our larger biotic regulation theory, which describes in quantitative terms how life regulates favorable conditions for favorable climate and environment. But today we focus on forest, water, and wind. And my task is to not just to tell you what the biotic pump is about, but I will try to present it in such a manner that you have some inner understanding of it. Because when you have formed your own picture, how it works, when you will be talking to other people, you will be convincing. So I ask you to forgive me in advance, because there will be a little bit of physics, but if you absorb it, it will pay, because you will feel some strength inside you. So, we start with 3 water puzzles, which actually challenge every person who has a critical thinking and want to understand life in integrity. So the first puzzle, and I recall that as a young girl, I felt it some intellectual discomfort when looking at rivers, because water is going away, and it is going away very quickly. It runs to the ocean, but we don't see that it comes, how it comes back. Where does it go from? If you ask people how much water is there on land, and can it happen that all it runs away to the ocean and we are left with nothing? Doesn't this intense flow violate the meta-conservation law? How does it come back? And as a young girl, I felt that unconsciously, like it's something, it troubled me, but I didn't pay much attention. And it so happened that as a scientist, I came to study it. So this puzzle pertains to hydrology. Another puzzle is less obvious, and we can only know it already using scientific knowledge. It is that plants appear to be very wasteful with respect to water. As biophysicists and plant physiologists established, plants emit about 300 water molecules per each CO2 molecule they fix in primary production. These are figures averaged over the entire biosphere. And with this large flow, plant transpiration actually accounts for a major part of evaporation on land. And evaporation represents the major energy flux. So, and if you read, say, literature on plant evolution and plant physiology, you will find that this wastefulness is referred to as something like unavoidable evil or plant dilemma, that plants on land cannot help losing water because cell membranes have not been invented by evolution in such a manner that they don't keep the water inside. But on the other hand, we know that there are many plants that are very that spend much less water during photosynthesis, and that there is a big difference between water use efficiency of C4 plants, the so-called C4 and C3 plants. So it appears that it is actually possible to have a greater water use efficiency. Still, we can see that the majority of plants, and especially trees, all are very wasteful. As they perform their life activities, as they grow, as they reproduce, perform photosynthesis, they spend, apparently waste, a lot of water. Why is this so? And another piece of the puzzle, or the third puzzle, is that it is also related to water, and this time also to wind. We notice that wind and water go hand in hand, and the strongest winds we observe when there is intense precipitation. When there is sunny weather, high pressure, we have mild winds, good weather, and everybody's happy. When there is rainy weather, lower pressure, strong winds, and you can see this recent bomb cyclone hit North America already this year. So strong winds, a lot of precipitation. And we can ask, given this tight correlation, what comes first, wind or rain? So we can see that these are three puzzles belonging to different fields of science, and the biotic pump actually resolves these puzzles in a unified manner and provides answers how all these things fit together. And first of all, what we do need to know about the water cycle on land, that there is actually very little fresh water on land. And this knowledge was not available until the 1950s, that is about 60 years ago, when people were able to do some global summaries of available data. But now we know that all water in soil, in rivers and lakes, which can run off, we don't include here the deep reservoirs, but the water that is goes away with the runoff. It is such a small amount that the existing rivers, which remove about 17,000 cubic kilometers of water per year from land, they could have depleted all this fresh water in less than 10 years. So it is not that there are some glaciers in the mountains or some lakes from which these rivers are flowing. No, there is no, they are not the source of these very intense fluxes that we saw in that video. It is a continuous process of losing water and returning to land in some way. So to explain the observed rivers, we need a continuous process that would replenish this moisture. And what the biotic pump says, it says that actually we have this circular picture when there is no beginning and no end, but everything works together. So we can start from any point. Water vapor condensation, as I will show you, drives winds. You can see on this slide that the water ascends, water vapor condenses, and this drives winds from ocean to land. Winds bring moisture from ocean to land. So if there are no winds, our rivers would run dry. This is very important. So rivers depend on winds that come from the ocean. And since they come from the ocean, from the moisture, they carry moisture. This moisture sustains condensation and continuously compensates for the river runoff. So there must be a flow of moisture from the ocean. And here, forest transpiration, that is this wastefulness of trees with respect to water, is key, because trees moisten the air by emitting water vapor and thus enable condensation, which in turn drives wind, which in turn bring moisture, which feeds rivers and also all life on land. So you can see, and this is what the biotic pump concept is about. If we remove forests, this process stalls, there is no condensation, no winds, and no rivers, and no life on land, like this. Now we get some idea how it works, how condensation drives winds. And here we need basically to appropriate just three ideas. First of all, as you all know, we know that air temperature drops as the air ascends. Yes, we all know that it is cold in the mountains. And this is a manifestation of energy conservation, like a ball which is bouncing from the floor. It loses kinetic energy in the upper point. You see, when it comes up, and at the uppermost point, it has zero kinetic energy. And since temperature is a measure of actual energy, so does the air which ascends. On the other hand, we have an atmosphere filled with water vapor. It is a it is very important that we have this water vapor which undergoes condensation. Why it undergoes? Because the number of water vapor molecules depend on temperature. Why does it depend on temperature? Because the more the temperature, the more energy the molecules have, and some of them can overcome the intramolecular forces within the water and can go away from the water. And the more the higher the temperature, the more there are such molecules. And it so happens that water vapor has this critical temperature in the temperature range that we observe on Earth. Because actually we also can find such conditions for CO2, for oxygen, for nitrogen. At some conditions they will be condensable as well. But only water vapor is condensable under terrestrial conditions. So, and the third idea is that air pressure drops when the number of gas molecules diminishes. You can see in the graph at the bottom of the slide that when there is there are few water molecules, there is a pressure difference, and when there is an opportunity for air, it will flow towards the area where the pressure is low. So now we can see that there is, imagine now that the air ascends, the number of water vapor molecules in this air drops, they condense into tiny water molecules, and so there appears a non-equilibrium pressure deficiency which pulls the air upward. And so it sustains the ascent, which is needed for the temperature to drop. You see, so it is a self-sustainable process. And now we will see how it works under laboratory conditions. Everyone can perform the experiment that we will now see. So we first, this is not our video, but we modified it from the link given below. So we first take hot water, fill the bottle with hot water, and there is a lot of water vapor above this water. So when we now remove the water from the bottle, you see, we have a moist bottle, hot bottle, which contains a lot of water vapor. Now we seal it, you see. The bottle begins to cool. We cannot see it, but it is cooling. And at a certain moment, the pressure drops, and we can see, you see, that as the pressure has dropped inside because of condensation, water from the water comes up because the pressure has become lower. You see, once again, you see, because of air pressure outside the bottle is now larger than inside the bottle, the water is drawn into the bottle, into the area of low pressure. And in the same manner, this is what occurs in the atmosphere when, just a moment, when we have a forest and large amounts of moist air ascend above the forest. So again, we have this condensation, and instead of water in the bottle, now the air from the surface is drawn or pulled towards the condensation which occurs in the atmosphere, and as it goes upwards, there is a pressure surface of water, a pressure shortage of water at the surface, and since there is this pressure shortage, the air is drawn horizontally from the ocean to land, and so dry air returns then, to complete the cycle, returns to the ocean in the upper atmosphere. So the key process is condensation, which is enabled by forest, which stores moisture in soil, then it transpires moisture in reaching the atmosphere, and then condensation can occur. And so this is actually, when we begin to study these phenomena, we approach them from different perspectives, because those physical processes that we have now considered, we describe them separately, and we thought that this must be the physics behind moisture transport from ocean to land. But then we took empirical data, precipitation, distribution of precipitation, and we decided to compare distribution of precipitation across the forested and non-forested regions of the world, which you can see in the lower diagram, these arrows indicate those transects along which we studied precipitation, taking into account the predominant direction of zonal wind, which is shown by thick, nearly transparent arrows in the lower diagram. And our idea, which also belongs to our key biotic regulation postulate, that if water is important for the forest must be able to ensure water availability. So life supports life conditions favorable for life. And we found that while in non-forested regions, these are empty symbols in the upper diagram, precipitation declines sharply with distance from the ocean, and it declines exponentially over a few hundred kilometers. So a few hundred kilometers from the coast, and you have 3 times less precipitation than the coast. In contrast, in forested regions, like you can see those filled black symbols, and these are the great Siberian rivers, including Yenisei, which is actually it is transect number 10, and this river is one of the most powerful rivers in the world, together with the Amazon and Congo, not like them, but still in the first 10 or five rivers. But it is removed from major ocean by several thousand kilometers, and still so far from the source of moisture, there is a lot of a very intense water cycle. And so we found that along forested transects, and here we have also Mackenzie, number 9, precipitation does not decline with distance from the ocean and may even grow. And this is a manifestation of how the biotic pump actually works, and how the forest, by controlling condensation, can lure or invite or import moist air from the ocean. And so in this way, forest wins the so to speak tug of war with the ocean, because there is also evaporation over the ocean, and the ocean also, it does moisten the atmosphere. But we can see that the forest has a very well-developed leaf index. So while the ocean has only one surface, in forest we have lots of surfaces, as all you know, and from these surfaces, the cumulative surface from which evaporation can occur is significantly higher than it is over the ocean. Besides, forests can, as we all also know, and it is a very intensely developing field of environmental science, forests emit various cloud condensation nuclei, which can initiate condensation even when there is not so much moisture in the air. And so in this way, forests enrich the atmosphere with water vapor more efficiently than does the ocean. And so condensation, which actually can be compared to an avalanche, something like burst-like process, which happens when the amount of water vapor has exceeded some threshold. And so, since the forest is more efficient in enriching the it becomes the predominant region where condensation occurs. And in this way, winds blow from ocean to land and not vice versa. Meanwhile, if we replace forest by some open vegetation of fields or something which is unable to store moisture in soil, which has a low leaf area index, which cannot emit the needed cloud condensation nuclei, then the ocean wins, and then the condensation area moves now towards the forest, towards the ocean, and then land we have desertification of land. And now we can see, and this is relevant for Canada also, because this is the boreal forest zone. We can see how it works seasonally. This graph shows the transect along the 60th parallel, where actually St. Petersburg is situated, from which we are now talking. And we can see that there is this very, very long forest belt, over 7,000 kilometers. And the predominant wind direction is from Atlantic Ocean, as you all know. And what we can see is that in summer we have a nearly uniform distribution of rainfall across 7,000 kilometers. And this is one thing, that it is uniform and it is larger than it is over the ocean. Meanwhile, in winter, when the forest is dormant, and so we can assume that the biotic pump is not working at its most, we can see that all moisture remains over the ocean. So despite the temperature is lower in winter apparently, still there is more rainfall over the ocean, little not only rainfall but also snow, little precipitation over land, and this precipitation declines from west to east. While in summer there is also apparently a flow of water from the Pacific Ocean against the predominant west to east wind direction. So apparently the forest is able to draw moisture from everywhere. And now we can see this graph. In the bottom row we can see the same boreal forest zone. In the right bottom there is unforested Australia, and the upper graph, it is transect near the equator, and it shows the Amazon forest and the Congo forest. And this red curve, shows the ratio of ocean to land precipitation, and also a logarithm is taken. So where this red curve is below the solid black line, there is less rain on land than over the ocean. When it goes above the zero line, there is more rainfall over land than over the ocean. And we can see that in the Amazon and Congo forest, and these are months, you see 12 months, practically all year round there is more rainfall than it is over the ocean. And if you look at this graph more carefully, when you have more time, you will also see that there is some tug of war between the Congo and the Amazon forest, because they the rain maxima don't coincide in time. And now look at Australia. You see, we all know that Australia is not all desert. There are rainy season, wet season, and there is dry season. But what is the key message of this right bottom graph is that independent of the availability of moisture over the ocean, that is independent of whether there is a lot of moisture, it is wet season, or little moisture, it is dry season, over the unforested Australia, precipitation is always significantly less than it is over the ocean. So it is not the absolute availability of moisture that is the key feature of the biotic pump, but that extensive forests are able to transport this moisture to the continental interiors. And now, what are the deforestation consequences for the water cycle? So if we have this pump, which is connected to the sea, then if we cut, for example, if we cut the forest at the coast, this means that we cut the pump from the source of moisture. And in this case, we have decoupled the remaining forest from moisture, and we will have deforestation and degradation of the inland of the water cycle in the continental interior. And this could have been the scenario of how Australia lost its vegetation, because we know that it was about or at least before first human settlers, say 100,000 years ago. So we have a record of much more intense vegetation there. So if people came and began to arrange fires at the coastal zone, so, and they destroyed just a small strip about, say, 100 or 200 kilometers. So this could have switched on this desertification scenario, and then the inland vegetation could have perished without leaving any traces of any major geophysical event, because this is what puzzles scientists. The vegetation disappeared without any, they just disappeared and period. So, and this ecological catastrophe could have, can explain this, these observations. Now, if we have a lot of moisture that normally goes over several thousand kilometers, but suddenly it cannot go there because there is no low pressure, no condensation, all this moisture precipitates where it is, that is over the ocean and at the coast. And so we will have severe floods in coastal regions and precipitation shortages in the continental interior. Moreover, since flood water is flushed away very quickly and cannot be accumulated in soil, so these floods, even in the coastal zone, will be followed by droughts, since water could not have been accumulated in soil. And for the boreal zone and temperate zone, it is also very important, also for the tropics, but the primary forests and successional forests have very different skills, so to speak, with respect to the water cycle functionality. They are very different. So if we, it is not just trees, you know, which grow and do some useful job. It is a very complex mechanism where we cannot arbitrarily change one part for the other. And when we destroy primary forests say in the boreal zone, these are evergreen spruce and replace them by successional forests like birch or something, this will disturb the biotic pump, because not just any trees will do. And here we have, this is a picture of succession, which of course you all know that during succession, everything changes in the forest. The capacity of soil to store moisture, leaf area index, moreover, the stability of forest itself, because to function as a biotic pump, the forest must be healthy itself. Because like a person, for a person to be able to do some useful work, he or she must be healthy. So everything changes, and thus there is so we cannot hope for a scenario that we, having destroyed primary forest, then we come, plant some trees of our choice and restore the water pump or the water cycle. No, it is not. This is a very dangerous idea. Once the primary forests are lost, everything is lost. And just one example, I am already finishing, of how this succession is different. For example, the evergreen trees, what is special about them? They have their foliage ready to work with first warmth. So spring has come and they are already there, happy to work, to draw moist air in. And in this sense, for example, in Europe, when there are primary forests, they begin to draw moist air from the Atlantic Ocean, and so there is cool spring, warmth is accumulating gradually, and we have this smooth change of seasons, and normal proceed normally from winter to spring to summer. Now imagine we have removed spruces and now we have birch everywhere, but they don't have leaves. They must wait until it is warm and they develop leaves, and only then they have this, could arrange this flow. And so we can see, so there is no flow when there are no leaves and the sun is shining, and we can have a very hot beginning of spring or something. Then suddenly there is foliage, trees begin to draw moist air, it becomes very cold, and so there is this chaos, and the seasons are disrupted. And when we do this on a large scale, like in Russia, across the entire northern western part, we are cutting forests, transporting them to Scandinavia, and so across huge territories, we are replacing these evergreens, ready to work trees by those trees who, besides being unstable because they are developing towards the climax, these are transient ecosystems. They are unable to properly transport water. And so here we have this conflict of the commercial value and, so to speak, hydrological competence of the forest. Because commercial value is about how fast the forest, the biomass, the wood is growing. But hydrological competence is maximized when the forest reaches maturity and has developed all the range of species and everything, and proper age distribution of trees, and all the fungi and bacteria and small invertebrates are present, then we have this fantastic machine created by evolution, which can work for us and do the water cycle. But at this successional stage, when the forest does have maximum productivity in terms of biomass increment, but this is how this can be compared to a sick, unhealthy person who is running a temperature. His metabolic rate is also very high, so the organism is working very quickly, but only in order to become healthy, to reach the fully functionable state. And so in this sense, we cannot hope that somehow we can simultaneously have the maximum productivity from trees, and at the same time we will have an intense water cycle. No, we need to leave the forest for itself, then it can work. And meanwhile, we need to meet our demand in wood and everything in another place, say doing plantations or something, just and forget about their ecological function. So separate it. So this is brief conclusions. So first, keep condensation going by moistening the atmosphere. This condensation drive winds bring moisture to land to compensate for river runoff and its water losses. And this biotic pump should be urgently taken into serious consideration by all concerned about continental water security. And I want just to say that this is not the whole story, because this trinity of forest, wind, and water also plays a crucial role in stabilization of the global temperature regime. But this is a different story, but still just keep in mind that there is a much bigger picture of forest impact on the environment. So that's all. Thank you very much. I need to make it half an hour, so I think I'm pretty within the schedule a bit. So we have time for questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Anastasia, hi, it's Nicole here with Canopy. Canopy's Executive Director. Thanks so much for that. That was excellent. It stretched my brain in so many different ways, and incredibly exciting science, especially for us, given the sometimes brain-numbing conversations that we find ourselves in with industry and with government decision makers around the importance of old growth forests and the need for conservation of large scale, at a large scale of the world's primary forest. So thank you for this. I think it's exciting for us to have yet another arrow to put in our quiver, especially one that's really based on robust science. So as you know, we do a lot of our work in the marketplace, but it's based on robust, radical, cutting edge science. And obviously this fits right into that. So I saw folks on this end madly scribbling things down. So maybe what we'll do is open it up for questions on this end, given that we have both of you, and Victor, available to us, which is such a treat.
Yes, it's Victor sitting here, and actually, when I say something wrong, he will.
Yeah. Yeah, I have 11 people in the room that do that with me. So any questions? Yeah, Catherine. Yeah.
Thanks so much. That was really, really fascinating. Should I be looking into this? Or
yes.
a
little computer.
I'm just wondering.
I see you, Victor.
I saw that you said that even age forests don't play the same role. And I just wondered if you could say more about that. So if you had like an even-aged evergreen forest, why would that not be as efficient in this cycle as a natural forest?
Yes, thank you very much. This is a very good question. And where are you? Just a moment.
I left.
Somehow. Yes. You see, you ask why an uneven-aged forest does not work as well as the primary forest. But the first question is that we don't know how the primary forest works. So it is we know the key physical mechanisms, but how to implement them, we have no idea. It is like, you know, this, как это, энергию-то они хотят получить из ядерного синтеза, like the idea of getting energy from nuclear synthesis. You see, the idea is very simple, but we still don't have this energy because it is a very complex process. Like, for example, take our body temperature. Our organism somehow maintains constant body temperature, and this requires a lot of biochemical reactions, very, very complex, that are all written in our genome. And so this is how all this works. Now, let us look at the water cycle. It is a much more complex task because you need to store moisture in soil, and this because you need to transpire, you see. But when you store moisture in soil, it leaks away because land is elevated. So you put some moisture in soil, hoping that you will transpire it when you need, but all moisture leaked away. So you need to put moisture, and then you need to transpire. But when you transpire, you lose water. And imagine that you transpire, and at the same time, the condensation is not sufficiently intense. So you have lost your water vapor, but no winds came. So it is like, in this sense, this process is like a investment. You can compare runoff to, say, inflation, which eats away your money. And when the tree transpires moisture, it invests into some process which takes the money or water vapor away. But hopefully, by spending this money, it will arrange a process of moisture transport, which will compensate both the inflation and the money that you had spent to this. And imagine that all this, the forest must perform under variable conditions, because there is autumn, there is spring, there is winter, and wind directions are changing. So, and recall that the major part of the planet is the oceans, which are masters of condensation. All water is there. So there are powerful geophysical processes with which the forest must cope somehow. And if it, say, transpires when the geophysical flows, the geophysical winds are unfavorable, say, and they are away from land to ocean, so at this moment, the forest should wisely keep its moisture to itself, because it will go away otherwise, and there is no chance to overcome. So in this sense, if you think a moment how it is realized, it is an ultra complex thing. And and as we are able to understand that it is very complex, we also understand that if a system where all functions are divided between different organisms, because you know that, for example, condensation nuclei, which initiate condensation, what is this? These are small, very small particles which plants emit to the atmosphere, and water vapor likes them and condenses on them, because if you make a very, very pure air, there are no these irregularities, and condensation can happen very lazily. It won't happen at all until very, very high concentrations are reached. So these condensation nuclei are produced not by trees often, but say by fungi, by bacteria that are associated with trees. And you need to produce the right amount of the right substances. And as science now, we know more and more, these are very complex substances and hundreds of them. So now, and we know that the system has worked. Now we come, destroy it, and put some trees of our choice, even aged. So just, it is like, you know, you have a car, then you break it, and then you take some, say, a wheel, and so what? It won't perform the function, even if you make many wheels or many. So, so this statement that arbitrary species cannot perform the same role as the primary ecosystem is based on evaluation of the complexity of living systems. We have some publications evaluating this complexion numerically. And for example, we have estimated that life processing capacity, how much information, bits of information life is processing, exceeds by 30 by 20 orders of magnitude all information processing capacity of our civilization. So these are huge amounts of information that trees and all organisms sense, they monitor and behave accordingly. So this is very important to understand. No chances that we destroy, pick up a random tree or a random species and it will work. No chances. And this is why we, as all with all our science, we have never managed. We can forget about the water cycle. This is the most complex thing. But we couldn't even arrange a closed system with a closed turnover of biogens. All such attempts failed. We are unable to make to take a room, put some species inside, and get them function for at least say 10 or 20 years. Everything disintegrates. So this is a major, and you see, this is our idea that this species, a certain tree will work. It is actually a very deeply rooted idea into our species, because we have always been working with species extracted from their natural environment. We are, as a species, we are ourselves living in a natural environment. You see, we are hairless primates. It is not our climate zone, you see? And so, through all our history of modern science, we have been working with plants which we used, just picked them, extracted them from their ecosystem and just used for very primitive purposes, like taking food from them. So our vision and our intrinsic idea of how life works has been was distorted by the fact that we have always worked and looked at species that don't perform any environmental regulation, like we ourselves. So it is you see, like all our civilization goes in glasses that distort and present a very primitive idea. We look at ecosystems which are able to do what we haven't been able to do. They are able to be sustainable, something we have never been able to achieve. But we are looking at them and considering them in terms of our artificial plant species and home animals with whom we studied and on which our science and life science is based. And this is, you see, we are trying to advance these ideas for many years already. And this is a very deeply, a very deep misconception. Sometimes you cannot trace it, but we have to fight with it continuously, finding arguments.
Absolutely.
Sorry for such a long answer.
It's good. We share your passion. We can feel it. I know that it's the information that you have is it's revelatory. It's, I think, things that we intrinsically feel and know, and it's great for us to have you on the line. So I think we just want to try and squeeze in a couple of extra questions if we can. So Melissa, who's also on screen, I'm working out.
Yes, I can see you. Hi.
Hi. Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I would just echo what Nicole said earlier in terms of like the broadening of the thoughts with with regards to the role of forest. I think it's really, really interesting. So thank you so much. I have two questions. The first one would be whether you think there is or there can be data that speak to a specific tipping point that would kind of throw the pump out of its really like capabilities and function. So if there's data specifically around that globally. So that's one question. And then my other question would be for you guys as scientists, what are your next steps and what is your ultimate vision and goal with this theory?
You see, yes, the question whether we have a tipping point, can pinpoint a point when the pump doesn't work. No, we cannot pinpoint it because it is very complex. But we can only extrapolate to the cases when we know it doesn't work. So, for example, if we destroy forests, say at the coast, say 200 kilometers, we can expect that the water cycle will degrade like this. But we cannot say if we are doing something in the continental interior, how it will be specifically manifested. No, we cannot say that. So we just actually what we do show in our publications, which are in climatological literature, we quantify the intensity of these condensation-driven winds. So we can say that, for example, if there is less rain, there is less wind. So we have some quantitative guidelines, physical guidelines, but how to say specifically, so if you cut this, we will all die, or cut and nothing will happen. This is difficult, and as scientists we cannot predict that with any certainty. So actually, I have shown you all that we have in terms of what we can say. We can only compare what we have in forests and what we have in unforested and extrapolate between them. And now, again, this is the question which are always asked. Reverse. What if we plant a few trees? Will we have a lot of rain? People ask me. We receive lots of questions from our readers of this time because people want to do something. Again, we don't know. It depends where you plant. For example, if we would to restore if we want to restore a water cycle, we need to find a place at the coast where the situation is more or less favorable and start from that point. If we start in the desert, then probably we won't succeed. So won't have success. Now to your second question, what we are going to do. You see, it is very complex. What we did, we proposed this mechanism, showed some correlation with precipitation regimes, and we made one important thing, which is that we quantified this circulation intensity that results from condensation and compared it to observations. So actually we showed that our theory explains the observed wind power, and this is what we are trying to push to the meteorological community, where there are different ideas about what drives winds. And so we have our other research in other areas also about environmental control by life. What is our immediate purpose is to show that our current vision of life and forests and the water cycle as it is, because it is now people don't take this into account. So they don't think that forests draw moisture in. If you ask, say, a hydrologist, he may say that forests grow where it is wet. You know, so there are wet regions, there are dry regions, where there is wet they grow. So we don't have this. And this does not only pertain to water cycle, but to other things as well. And our next task is to show that this view, it is a minimal task, that this view, which we have adopted unconsciously, it is the mainstream, but this view has no solid ground. Not that we have done already something positive with respect to our theory, like an alternative, but now we are saying that what you think is correct, that trees don't matter, does not have any grounds. It is just a convention which was adopted historically without uncritically, basically, and this route led us to meteorological community, and we published, if you looked at our list of lots of seemingly very specific papers in areas like hurricane research, like global circulations, which are seemingly unrelated to forests. But the idea behind these works is to show that those concepts that currently discard any role for forests are ungrounded. So these are just it is like your work. If you begin to to tell me your difficulties, you see there are lots of difficulties and lots of subtleties, and here also it is a big chaos. All these models and historically and lots of, but we want to show them that as a baseline, look critically at what you think is correct, because having uncritically adopted these ideas that forests don't matter, that life adapts to everything, that those who perished are the least fittest, and let them go, this is our mentality of our civilization. So this, look at this critically, and the trajectory which is based on this scientific, but in fact just conventional thinking, is leading us to a precipice, while the alternative theory, alternative worldview, I would say, for which we are arguing, is at the very least seemingly same. It is, first of all, it's coherent, because there are very serious considerations in favor of this alternative view. And what is important, that this alternative view prescribes an entirely different trajectory for how to cope with the environmental crisis. So what I want to say, even if you take two people, say people who want to solve the crisis, accept global warming, all these things, green thinkers, they this mentality of conventional mentality, which is also based on this intrinsic idea of superiority of human being, like being most clever, but in fact underappreciating the complexity of life. It leads to a very different trajectory. For example, this simplistic thinking is like, the main thing is CO2, right? For example, water, we don't know, CO2. So, for example, to solve this CO2 problem, it is proposed to make, say, green energy, recycling and biofuel. But if life is important for environmental regulation, this is a suicidal measure, and it won't bring any positive effect. So right now we're working on a paper where we want to unite many authors, where we will show discrepancies from different fields of science, how they are responsible for this worldview which rejects any major role of natural ecosystems in our problems and in how to overcome them. So we are trying to be disruptive with respect to the current paradigm. Something like this. You see, the situation is different, so it's difficult. So we are trying to find the Achilles heel, where to attack.